In a small town where trust is everything, one misunderstanding changes everything. Rachel, a devoted stepmother, is building a new life with her husband Daniel and his two sons, Liam and Noah. But a routine day at the lake takes a shocking turn when Rachel is accused of kidnapping. A desperate lie from Liam, a community quick to judge, and a family on the brink. Rachel faces a fight to clear her name and hold her family together. Will Liam realize the truth before it's too late? Can a town filled with suspicion learn to see beyond its assumptions? And will Rachel's love be enough to rebuild what's been broken? If you're ready for a story of love, redemption, and second chances, like this video and hit subscribe for more stories that make you think. Comment below, what would you do if your whole world turned against you in an instant? Join us and find out what happens next. The early afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over Crescent Lake Park, a popular spot in the quiet town of Willow Creek. The town, nestled among rolling hills and dense woods, was a place where people knew their neighbors, and surprises were few and far between. But for Emma West, these weekend walks had become a sanctuary, an escape from the relentless pace of her work as a real estate agent. Her dog Buddy, a small terrier with boundless energy, bounded ahead of her, stopping occasionally to sniff at the roots of the old oak trees lining the path. Today, as she strolled down the familiar path, Emma tried to shake off the stress of a particularly difficult week. Her mind churned with thoughts of a deal that had fallen through, the bills piling up on her desk, and the sense that, at 53, she was falling behind in a world that seemed to move faster every year. She glanced out at the lake, where the sunlight danced on the surface, turning the water into a sea of sparkling diamonds. A small breeze ruffled her graying hair, and she took a deep breath, trying to let the tension slip away. But just as she was beginning to relax, her attention was drawn to a scene near the lake's edge. A woman standing with two children. The woman, who looked to be in her 30s, had a striking presence. She was tall and graceful, with deep brown skin and tightly curled hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a faded red jacket over jeans, her posture poised but tense. Next to her, a young boy of about 5 clung to her hand, looking up at her with a mix of trust and confusion. His messy blonde hair and expensive-looking sweater seemed to clash with the woman's simple attire. Nearby, an older boy, probably around 10, paced restlessly back and forth. His face was flushed, streaked with dried tears, and his arms were crossed tightly over his chest. He threw glances at the woman, his expression a mixture of defiance and anxiety. He muttered something under his breath, too quiet for Emma to hear, but she could see the way the woman's shoulders stiffened in response. Something about the scene made Emma slow her steps. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. Perhaps it was the contrast between the woman's focused calm and the older boy's obvious distress, or the way the younger child seemed to cling to her like a lifeline. A knot of unease formed in Emma's stomach. She'd lived in Willow Creek her whole life and thought she knew everyone, but she didn't recognize the woman. She glanced around the park, wondering if anyone else had noticed, but the few joggers and families nearby seemed absorbed in their own worlds. Emma stopped by a bench, pretending to adjust Buddy's leash, but her gaze kept drifting back to the trio by the water. Her mind, usually occupied with property listings and client meetings, filled with images from news stories, missing children, strangers with ill intentions slipping into quiet towns. She could hear the voice of her mother, long gone but still vivid in her memory, warning her to always trust her instincts. As Emma continued to watch, the woman reached out, placing a gentle hand on the older boy's shoulder, trying to coax him toward her, but he jerked away, his voice rising. "No, I don't want to go with you. You're not my mom." His words carried over the still water, sharp enough to make Emma flinch. The woman seemed to flinch too, but she quickly masked it, crouching down to the boy's level, speaking in a low, measured tone. Emma couldn't hear what she was saying, but the tension between them was unmistakable. The younger boy, still holding the woman's hand, pressed closer to her side, burying his face against her leg. He seemed oblivious to the rising tension, but the scene set Emma's nerves on edge. Buddy tugged at his leash, eager to keep moving, but Emma's unease kept her rooted to the spot. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that she was witnessing a situation that needed intervention. Her pulse quickened as her mind cycled through worst-case scenarios. She knew she couldn't ignore it, not if there was even a chance that these children might be in danger. She looked around again, hoping to spot a familiar face, but the park seemed strangely empty of anyone she knew. Her gaze finally landed on a police cruiser parked near the playground, where a pair of officers were talking with one of the regular dog walkers. Emma took a deep breath, telling herself she was doing the right thing. She gathered Buddy's leash and started toward the officers, her heart pounding in her chest. As Emma approached the police car, she tried to steady her breathing, but her voice came out higher pitched than she intended. "Excuse me, officers, I think there's something you should check out." Officer Brad Stokes, a stocky man in his 40s with close-cropped hair, turned to face her. He adjusted his belt, his expression shifting from casual conversation to professional attentiveness. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" Emma swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her decision. She gestured toward the lake, where the woman and the children were still standing. "There's a woman over there, with 2 kids, and something doesn't seem right. The older boy looks really upset, and he said she wasn't his mother. It sounded like he didn't want to go with her." Brad's brows furrowed as he followed Emma's gaze. His partner, Officer Lucas Reed, a younger man with a more laid-back demeanor, glanced over as well, his expression more curious than concerned. Brad exchanged a look with Lucas, then turned back to Emma. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll check it out." As the officers began to walk toward the woman and the children, Emma hung back, biting her lip. A part of her wanted to follow them, to make sure they understood how serious this seemed, but she forced herself to stay in the patrol car. She watched as Brad and Lucas approached the woman, who had straightened up at their approach, her expression cautiously. Rachel Harper, unaware of the storm that was about to break over her, met the officers with a tentative smile. She'd lived in Willow Creek for only a year, moving here when she married Daniel Harper, who had grown up in the town. She knew that being a new face in a small community came with challenges, but she had hoped to make a life here, a safe, stable home for her new family. When the officers stopped in front of her, she tightened her grip on Noah's hand, her pulse quickening. "Is something wrong, officers?" she asked, keeping her voice steady even as a familiar knot of anxiety twisted in her chest. Officer Brad's expression was impassive, but his eyes flicked toward Liam, who was watching the scene unfold with wary defiance. "We've had a report about some suspicious behavior," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Can you tell us your relationship to these children?" Rachel's smile faltered, replaced by a look of uncertainty. "I'm their stepmother," she explained, her voice taking on a nervous edge. "This is Noah, he's 5, and that's Liam, he's 10. Their father, Daniel, is out of town on a business trip. Is there a problem?" Officer Brad glanced at Lucas, who gave a small shrug, his casual demeanor belying the tension in the air. Brad turned his attention to Liam, crouching down slightly to address the boy directly. "Hey, buddy, is what she's saying true? Is this woman your stepmother?" Liam hesitated, glancing sideways at Rachel. He thought of his mother, Lisa, her perfume that smelled like flowers, the way she used to tousle his hair and make him laugh. He missed her so much it hurt, and he resented Rachel for being here instead. His voice came out sharper than he intended, the words spilling out like a challenge. "She's lying. She's trying to take us away." Rachel's breath caught in her throat, and she turned to Liam, her expression stricken. "Liam, you don't mean that," she said, but there was a tremor in her voice. "I'm just trying to get you home." But Brad's face had already hardened, and he straightened, his hand hovering near his radio. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us to the station just to clear things up. Let's not make this difficult." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she looked between the officers, her mind racing. She knew how these situations could spiral out of control. She'd seen the news stories, heard the statistics. Panic surged up her spine, and she struggled to keep her voice calm. "Please, just call my husband. He'll explain everything." But Brad's patience had worn thin. He gestured to Lucas, who stepped forward to take Noah's hand. "Ma'am, I need you to come with us. We'll sort this out at the station." Rachel felt her world tilt as the situation slipped out of her control. She looked over her shoulder, seeing Emma watching from a distance, and a flash of anger mingled with the fear constricting her chest. "You don't understand," she insisted, her voice breaking. "I haven't done anything wrong." But the officers were already guiding her toward the patrol car, her hands trembling as they placed the handcuffs on her wrists. The metal was cold against her skin, a stark reminder of how quickly everything had changed. As Rachel was led away, Liam stood frozen, his anger fading into something more complicated. He hadn't expected things to go this far. He just wanted to get back at Rachel for trying to replace his mother, for taking over his home. Now watching her being escorted to the police car, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Noah, too young to fully understand what was happening, clutched Lucas's hand, looking back over his shoulder at Rachel with wide, confused eyes. "Where's Rachel going?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Liam didn't answer, couldn't answer. He felt a strange tightness in his chest as he watched the officers guide Rachel into the back of the patrol car. He thought of how she had taken care of him when he'd had the flu last winter, the way she'd stayed up with him all night, gently rubbing his back as he shivered with fever. He thought of the way she always tried to include him, even when he pushed her away. Emma watched the scene unfold from her spot near the cruiser, a sense of grim satisfaction settling in her chest. She told herself that she'd done the right thing, that she had protected those children from a potential danger. But as she saw the haunted look in Rachel's eyes when she glanced back at Liam, a small, uncomfortable doubt began to creep into her mind. The police station was a world of fluorescent lights, the hum of computers, and the quiet murmur of officers going about their duties. But to Rachel, it felt like a prison. The small interrogation room they put her in was cold and sterile, a single chair and table under a harsh, overhead light. She could feel the weight of every second dragging by, each moment filled with the unbearable uncertainty of what would happen next. Across from her, Officer Brad leaned forward, arms crossed over the table. His tone was firm but not unkind as he pressed her for details. "Just tell us the truth, ma'am. If you admit what you've done, we can make this easier for everyone." Rachel shook her head, her voice cracking as she tried to hold back her panic. "I've told you the truth. I'm their stepmother. Call my husband, Daniel Harper. He'll tell you everything. I love those boys. I would never hurt them." But Brad's expression remained skeptical, and he exchanged a glance with Lucas, who stood by the door. "We're working on reaching him, but until then, you need to cooperate. Just tell us why the older boy would say you're not his mother if everything's fine." Rachel's hands clenched into fists on her lap, her nails digging into her palms. How could she explain the complexities of their fractured family to a stranger who had already made up his mind? She thought of Daniel, of the promise he'd made when they got married, that they'd face every challenge together. But now she was alone, and no one believed her. Meanwhile, outside the room, Liam stood with Noah, his legs shaking beneath him. He glanced through the glass window, watching Rachel's slumped figure, and felt a rush of guilt that nearly choked him. But when he thought of his mother, of how she'd left without a backward glance, his resolve hardened again. He had to believe that he'd done the right thing, even if a small voice in the back of his mind whispered otherwise. Daniel Harper drove down Route 17, the familiar countryside of Willow Creek blurring past him, a feeling of unease pressing against his ribs. His phone sat on the passenger seat, a recent call from the Willow Creek Police Department replaying in his mind. Rachel, detained. The boys involved in some kind of misunderstanding. The officer's voice had been curt, the details sparse, but the implications had hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter, his thoughts racing back to the last time he had spoken to Rachel. He had called from a hotel in Chicago, assuring her that he'd be back soon, promising that he'd help smooth things over with Liam. He'd known how difficult it had been for Rachel to step into the role of stepmother, especially with Liam's resentment simmering just beneath the surface, but he had believed that time would heal the wounds left by Lisa's departure. Now the thought that Rachel might be facing accusations serious enough to involve the police, sent a cold jolt of fear through him. He forced himself to focus on the road, pushing the car faster as the town's outskirts came into view. By the time Daniel pulled into the parking lot of the Willow Creek Police Station, the sun was sinking low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt. He barely registered the cool evening air as he stepped out of the car, his eyes scanning the entrance. He spotted Liam and Noah sitting on a bench near the front doors, looking small and uncertain against the building's imposing brick facade. Noah's face lit up when he saw his father, and he scrambled off the bench, running to wrap his arms around Daniel's legs. "Daddy, I was scared. Where's Rachel?" Daniel crouched down, scooping Noah into a tight hug. He glanced over Noah's shoulder at Liam, whose expression was carefully blank, his arms crossed over his chest. "It's okay, Noah. I'm here now. Everything's going to be fine." He turned his attention to Liam, a frown creasing his brow. "Liam, what happened? Why is Rachel in there?" Liam shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the ground. For a moment his lower lip trembled, but then he steeled himself, refusing to let the guilt show. "She was trying to take us somewhere, and I told the police she's not our real mom. They thought she was dangerous." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had expected challenges when he and Rachel decided to build a life together, but he hadn't imagined that things could spiral this far out of control. He placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, squeezing gently, trying to keep his voice steady. "Liam, I know you miss your mom, but Rachel is here because she cares about you and your brother. We need to sort this out, together." Liam's eyes filled with tears, but he turned his head away, too proud to let them fall. "She's not my real mom, Dad. I just want things to go back to how they used to be." Daniel's heart ached at his son's words, but there was no time to address the wounds between them now. He stood holding Noah's hand as he guided the boys toward the entrance. They had to clear Rachel's name before anything else. Inside the police station, Rachel sat alone in the interrogation room, her wrists still tingling from the too tight handcuffs. The harsh light overhead made her feel exposed, vulnerable, as if the brightness could strip away her dignity. She had stopped trying to convince the officers. They wouldn't listen. They kept pressing her, as if her every word was a lie, and all she could do now was wait for Daniel. As she stared at the door, it finally swung open, but it wasn't Daniel who walked through. It was Lisa, the boy's biological mother, her face a mask of irritation beneath her perfectly styled hair. Her sharp heels clicked against the floor as she took a seat across from Rachel, eyeing her with thinly veiled contempt. "Well, this is a mess, isn't it?" Lisa's voice dripped with sarcasm as she crossed her legs. "I was just about to leave for Hawaii, and now I have to deal with this nonsense." Rachel struggled to keep her composure. "Lisa, I don't know why you're here, but you need to help me explain to the police. Tell them I'm not a threat. They won't listen to me." Lisa's lips curled into a cold smile, her gaze shifting to the two-way mirror behind Rachel. "Oh, they'll listen, don't worry. But let's get one thing straight, Rachel. I'm not here because I care about what happens to you. I'm here because the police called and said my boys were involved." Rachel swallowed hard, her frustration rising. "This isn't about us, Lisa. It's about Liam and Noah. They need stability. They need a family." Lisa let out a dry laugh, the sound cutting through the tense air. "And you think you're the one to give them that? You think you can just walk into their lives and replace me?" Rachel clenched her fists under the table, willing herself to stay calm. "I'm not trying to replace you, Lisa. I'm trying to be there for them, to give them a home where they feel safe. You walked away. I'm the one who stayed." Lisa's expression darkened, but before she could respond, the door opened again, and Daniel stepped into the room. His face was flushed, his expression a mix of relief and anger, as he took in the sight of his wife seated across from his ex-wife. "Lisa, what are you doing here?" he demanded, glancing between the two women. "This isn't about your vacation. This is about getting Rachel out of this mess." Lisa raised an eyebrow, looking utterly unperturbed. "Oh, don't worry, Daniel. I've already told them she's your wife and that she's not some kidnapper. But if you think I'm going to stay here and play happy families, you've got another thing coming." She stood, adjusting her purse over her shoulder with a dismissive flick of her hair. "I've got a plane to catch." She turned on her heel, striding toward the door, but Daniel grabbed her arm, his voice low and fierce. "You can't just walk out on them again, Lisa. Don't you see what this is doing to Liam? He needs you." Lisa wrenched her arm free, her eyes narrowing with a cold, detached amusement. "Liam is your problem now, Daniel. I've moved on, and so should you. She turned to Rachel, her smile cutting like a knife. Good luck with your little family. As Lisa left the room, the door slamming shut behind her, Daniel felt the sting of her words settle in his chest like poison. He turned back to Rachel, reaching out to cup her face, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Rachel. I should have been here sooner. I should have. Rachel cut him off, pressing a finger to his lips. It's not your fault, Daniel. We'll figure this out. But right now, we need to make sure Liam understands what he's done, before this gets any worse. After a tense conversation with the officers, Daniel managed to secure Rachel's release, but the emotional damage of the day lingered. As they stepped into the station's waiting area, they found Liam standing alone, staring blankly at the floor. He glanced up when he saw them, his expression filled with a mixture of relief and fear. Rachel approached him slowly, her voice soft but firm. Liam, do you understand what happened today? Why the police thought I might be trying to hurt you? Liam shifted uncomfortably, his hands twisting the hem of his shirt. I just wanted Mom to come back for us. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Rachel knelt down in front of him, her eyes searching his face. Liam, I know you're hurting, but lying like that, it put all of us in danger. The police could have taken me away, and then what would have happened to you and Noah? Tears welled in Liam's eyes and he looked away, his voice cracking. I didn't think they'd believe me. I thought they'd know you wouldn't hurt us. I just wanted Mom to care. Rachel felt her chest tighten at the raw pain in his voice, but before she could respond, the door to the waiting area swung open. Lisa stepped back inside, her face twisted with irritation. Liam, for God's sake, stop whining. You're embarrassing yourself. She grabbed his arm, pulling him sharply toward her. Liam yelped in surprise, stumbling against her side. I told you, you're staying with your father and his new wife. I don't have time for your games. Daniel stepped forward, his voice rising. Lisa, let him go. You've done enough. But before he could finish, Lisa's hand shot out, aiming a slap at Liam's head. Rachel, moving without thinking, stepped in front of him, taking the slap across her own cheek. The force of it made her stagger, but she held her ground, glaring at Lisa with a fierceness that made even the officers in the room pause. You don't get to do that, Lisa, Rachel said, her voice steady despite the sting on her cheek. Not anymore. Lisa stared at her, stunned, but Rachel didn't give her a chance to respond. She turned to Liam, reaching out to gently touch his shoulder. Come on, Liam, let's go home. Daniel took Liam's hand, and Rachel gathered Noah in her arms, guiding them toward the exit. Behind them, Lisa stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief, but they didn't look back. For the first time, Liam leaned into Rachel's touch, his small frame trembling with unspoken grief. The drive home was quiet, the hum of the car engine filling the space between them. Noah had fallen asleep in Rachel's arms, his head nestled against her shoulder, but Liam sat rigidly in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the darkened countryside outside the window. When they reached the house, Daniel parked the car, but no one moved to get out. He glanced back at Liam, his expression filled with a mixture of exhaustion and sadness. Liam, I know today was hard, but we need to talk about what happens next. Liam's face crumpled, and he buried it in his hands, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry, Rachel. I didn't mean to make everything so bad. Rachel reached back, her hand finding Liam's in the dark. We know, Liam. We know you didn't mean it. But we have to find a way to make things better. Together. Can you do that with us? Liam sniffled, his voice small and broken. I'll try. I don't want to lose you too. As they sat together in the darkness, the weight of the day settling around them like a blanket, Rachel felt a glimmer of hope amidst the pain. They were far from healed, far from whole, but for the first time, she believed they could begin to find their way back to each other. The morning after Rachel's release from the police station, the Harper household felt like a building on the edge of collapse. The air was thick with silence, interrupted only by the occasional clink of dishes or the muffled sound of a TV playing in the next room. Rachel moved through the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate, as if trying to hold herself together with each task. She completed, scrambling eggs, pouring coffee, setting out plates. She could feel the ache in her cheek where Lisa's slap had left a faint mark, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her heart. Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Rachel with a furrowed brow. He could see the exhaustion in her every gesture, the way her shoulders sagged under the weight of everything that had happened. He wanted to say something, to promise that things would get better, but the words felt hollow in his mouth. Instead, he just reached out and squeezed her hand as she passed by, offering what little comfort he could. Liam sat at the dining table, staring down at his uneaten breakfast, his fork clutched tightly in his hand. He felt a swirl of emotions inside him: guilt, shame, anger. But he didn't know how to express any of them. He glanced up at Rachel, then quickly looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Every time he saw the bruise on her cheek, he felt a sharp stab of regret, but he couldn't bring himself to apologize. The words stuck in his throat like a painful lump. Across from him, Noah chattered absently about a project he was doing at school, unaware of the tension that coiled through the room like a live wire. He seemed content to sit by Rachel's side, leaning into her warmth, drawing comfort from her presence in a way that Liam had never allowed himself to do. Rachel forced a smile for Noah's sake, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the previous night, to Lisa's cold indifference, to the way Liam had crumbled when he realized the consequences of his actions. She knew Liam was hurting, that he missed his mother in a way that she might never fully understand. But she couldn't help the anger that bubbled up alongside her sympathy, the hurt she felt from being cast as the villain in his eyes. She just wanted to find a way to reach him, to help him see that she wasn't the enemy. Daniel cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Rachel, I was thinking, maybe it would help if we all went out to the park later. Get some fresh air, try to put this behind us. Rachel hesitated, glancing at Liam, who remained stubbornly silent, his gaze fixed on his plate. I don't know, Daniel, she said quietly. I think we need to have some conversations first, before we can pretend everything is normal. Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. He knew she was right. They couldn't just sweep this under the rug. But the thought of confronting all the raw, messy emotions between them felt like walking into a storm with no shelter in sight. A week passed, each day dragging on with a heavy sense of unease. Rachel tried to find a routine, pouring herself into household chores and her part-time job at a local community center. But the distance between her and Liam seemed to widen with every awkward interaction. She noticed the way he avoided her, spending more time in his room or disappearing to the backyard with Buddy for long stretches of time. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, Rachel found herself standing alone in the backyard, gazing up at the stars. The night air was cool, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that seemed to seep into her bones. The thought came to her unbidden. What if I'm not what they need? What if I'm just making things worse? She heard the back door creak open and turned to see Daniel stepping outside, his expression drawn. He walked over to her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. You're out here late, he said, trying to keep his tone light, but the concern in his eyes was impossible to miss. Rachel let out a shaky breath, resting her head against his shoulder. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Daniel. I keep telling myself that I can make things better, that if I just keep trying, Liam will come around. But what if he never does? Daniel tightened his hold on her, his heart breaking at the vulnerability in her voice. He had always admired Rachel's strength, the way she faced challenges head on. But he knew that this was different. This wasn't just about adjusting to a new family. It was about healing wounds that went far deeper than either of them had anticipated. It's not just on you, Rachel, he said quietly. I should have been there. I should have seen how much Liam was struggling before it got this bad. Rachel shook her head, her voice thick with emotion. It's not about blame, Daniel. It's just, I want him to know that I'm not trying to replace his mother. I just want to be someone he can trust. Daniel sighed, his gaze drifting over the shadowy outline of the yard. Liam's been through so much change in such a short time. It's going to take more than just time. It's going to take all of us being honest with each other, even when it hurts. Rachel nodded, but uncertainty lingered. I'm afraid that I'll push too hard, that I'll break something that can't be fixed. Daniel cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. You've been the glue holding this family together, Rachel. Liam might not see it now, but one day he will. And when that day comes, he'll know how lucky he is to have you. Rachel managed a small, shaky smile, leaning into his touch. But as they stood there under the stars, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were teetering on the edge of a precipice, one misstep away from falling into something they couldn't climb out of. The turning point came one rainy afternoon, when the storm outside mirrored the turmoil within the Harper household. The rain beat against the windows, turning the backyard into a muddy mess, and the air inside was thick with tension. Rachel had spent most of the day tidying up the living room, while Daniel tried to get some work done at the dining room table. Liam sat on the couch, a comic book open on his lap, but he hadn't turned a page in over an hour. Rachel finally couldn't take the silence any longer. She set down the dust cloth she'd been using and turned to face Liam, her hands trembling slightly. Liam, I think we need to talk. Liam stiffened, not looking up from his comic. I don't want to talk. Rachel took a deep breath, forcing herself to keep her voice calm. I know you're upset. I know you miss your mom. But I need you to understand that what happened at the police station, it was serious. The things you said, they made people believe I was dangerous. Liam's hands clenched around the edges of the comic, and he finally looked up, his expression filled with anger and pain. I didn't mean for it to get that bad. I just wanted someone to listen. I wanted her to care. Rachel felt her heart break at the raw desperation in his voice. She knelt down in front of him, her voice soft but firm. Liam, I'm not your mom. I can't be her, and I know that's hard for you. But I am someone who cares about you. I'm here because I want to be, because I want to help you and your brother. But I can't do that if you keep pushing me away. Liam's shoulders began to shake, and he dropped his gaze, his voice barely more than a whisper. I thought if I made things hard enough, maybe she'd come back. But she didn't. Rachel reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. It's okay to be angry, Liam. It's okay to feel hurt, but we have to find a way forward. I'm not going to give up on you, even if you think I will. Liam's breath hitched, and suddenly he was crying, the sobs coming out in jagged gas. Rachel pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as he wept against her shoulder. Daniel watched from the doorway, his own eyes misting as he took in the scene. He knew that this was only the beginning of their healing, but it was a beginning nonetheless. In the weeks that followed, the Harper family began to find a new rhythm, one that felt more fragile but more honest. Liam and Rachel started spending time together in small, manageable ways, working side by side in the garden, playing board games with Noah, or taking Buddy for walks around the neighborhood. Their conversations were awkward at first, but Rachel noticed that Liam seemed to be trying, and she made each small effort with quiet encouragement. One afternoon, as they weeded the garden together, Liam spoke up suddenly, his voice hesitant. Rachel, do you think Mom really cared about us? Rachel paused, glancing over at him. His face was shadowed by uncertainty, and she could see how deeply the question weighed on him. I think your mom loved you in her own way, Liam, she said carefully. But sometimes people have their own problems that make it hard for them to show that love. It's not your fault that she couldn't be there the way you needed. Liam nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. He reached for a handful of weeds, pulling them up with more force than necessary. I used to think that if I was better, she'd want to come back. But I think I understand now that it's not about me. Rachel's chest tightened with a mix of pride and sorrow. It's not, Liam, and you deserve to be loved for exactly who you are. Liam met her gaze, his expression vulnerable in a way she had rarely seen. I'm sorry for what I did to you, Rachel, for saying those things. I didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't belong here. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, offering him a soft smile. Thank you, Liam. That means a lot to me. They worked side by side in the garden for the rest of the afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the yard. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, one step closer to becoming the family they were all trying to be. The town of Willow Creek had always prided itself on being a close-knit community, but the incident involving Rachel had become a subject of whispered conversations, forcing some of its residents to confront uncomfortable truths. Emma, who had been at the center of the initial misunderstanding, found herself unable to shake the guilt that had settled in her chest like a heavy stone. She knew she had played a part in Rachel's ordeal, and the realization gnawed at her. Determined to make amends, Emma began volunteering at the local community center, where Rachel worked part-time. The center, a small, converted school building near the town square, hosted programs for children and seniors, offering everything from art classes to free meals. Emma's first day back at the center, she spotted Rachel leading a group of kids in a messy finger painting session. Her heart twisted as she watched Rachel smile gently at a child who had splattered paint on their clothes, Rachel's patience and kindness evident even in the smallest moments. During a break, Emma found Rachel by the vending machines, filling a paper cup with coffee. She cleared her throat, feeling a surge of nervousness. "Rachel, can I talk to you for a minute?" Rachel turned, her expression cautious but polite. "Sure, Emma. What's on your mind?" Emma took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet Rachel's eyes. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day at the lake. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I realize now how wrong I was. I'm sorry for what I put you through. I hope you can forgive me." Rachel studied her for a moment, then let out a slow breath. "Emma, it's not easy to forgive something like that, but I appreciate you coming here and saying this. I know you meant well, even if it went horribly wrong." Emma's shoulders slumped with relief, a tentative smile breaking through. "Thank you, Rachel. I'm trying to learn, to do better. I don't want to be the kind of person who jumps to conclusions." Rachel nodded, offering a small smile of her own. "We all have things we need to work on, Emma. What matters is that you're willing to change." As word spread about Emma's efforts, other townspeople took notice. Some who had kept their distance from Rachel began to approach her at the grocery store, offering tentative greetings or stopping for short conversations about the weather or the latest town events. It wasn't an apology, but Rachel recognized it for what it was: a slow, tentative opening, a recognition that she wasn't the outsider they had feared. Meanwhile, Daniel worked with the town council to organize a series of community dialogues about prejudice and understanding. He believed that what had happened to Rachel could be a catalyst for positive change, a way for Willow Creek to become a place that truly lived up to its reputation of kindness and unity. The first of these meetings was held at the town hall, with rows of folding chairs set up in the large wood-paneled room. As the meeting began, Daniel stood at the front of the room, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "We all saw what happened when assumptions took over. My family went through something no one should have to face, but we're not here to point fingers. We're here because we believe that Willow Creek can do better." Rachel spoke next, her voice carrying a quiet strength. She shared the fear she'd felt that day, the pain of being treated as a criminal, but also her hope that their story could prevent others from facing the same. As she spoke, she noticed Emma nodding in the audience, her expression filled with regret but also determination. It gave Rachel the courage to continue. When Liam took the microphone, the room fell silent. He shifted on his feet, his hands gripping the edges of the podium. "I'm the one who told the police that Rachel wasn't my mom. I was angry, and I thought it would make my real mom come back, but it didn't. And I hurt someone who only wanted to help me." His voice cracked, but he kept going, his face flushed with the effort. "I'm sorry, Rachel, and I hope that other people in this town can see that just because someone looks different, it doesn't mean they're not family." There was a murmur in the crowd, a mix of surprise and sympathy. Some people dabbed at their eyes while others looked down, reflecting on their own assumptions. As the meeting continued, the discussions grew more open, neighbors sharing their own stories and fears, recognizing the need for change. It wasn't easy, and not everyone was ready to admit their mistakes, but the seeds of something better had been planted. The days after the town meeting were filled with a subtle but profound shift in Willow Creek. The stories shared at the meeting, tales of Rachel's struggle and Liam's heartfelt apology, had struck a chord with many residents, revealing cracks in the town's picture-perfect image. But instead of shying away from those cracks, people began to lean into them, eager to reshape their town's culture. Emma continued her work at the community center, but now she wasn't alone. A group of volunteers, many of whom had been at the meeting, began showing up to help with food drives, after-school programs, and town cleanup efforts. Emma found herself collaborating with people she'd known for decades but never truly spoken to, discovering how their lives, too, had been shaped by old biases and unspoken fears. One chilly Saturday morning, she helped organize a neighborhood cleanup at Crescent Lake Park, the same place where she had first misjudged Rachel. As she raked leaves along the path, she found herself joined by Mr. Johnson, the elderly man who had lived across from her since she was a child. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the crisp air filling their lungs before Mr. Johnson spoke. "I watched that town meeting from the back," he said, his voice rough from years of smoking. "Didn't think I'd ever see a day when people would sit down and really listen to each other in this town." Emma leaned on her rake, glancing over at him. "I didn't think I'd see it either, to be honest. But I'm glad we're finally starting to have these conversations." Mr. Johnson chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "This town's got its flaws, that's for sure. But it's people like you and that Harper woman who keep me hoping we might actually learn from them." Emma smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. Something that was making a real difference. Meanwhile, at the community center, Rachel continued her work with renewed purpose. She helped set up workshops for parents and children, aimed at fostering communication and understanding. One afternoon, as she prepared the space for a discussion group, she noticed a few new faces among the regulars. People who had once avoided eye contact with her at the grocery store or across the street when they saw her coming. Now they were here, their expressions tentative but hopeful. As the group sat in a circle, Rachel introduced herself and invited the others to share their stories. A middle-aged woman named Susan, who had never spoken more than a few words to Rachel before, raised her hand. "I have to admit, when you first moved here, I had my doubts," she confessed, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I thought you were too different, that you wouldn't fit in. But after everything that happened, I see now that I was the one who needed to change." Rachel nodded, a gentle smile on her face. "I appreciate you saying that, Susan. It's not easy to admit when we're wrong, but that's how we grow. I'm learning that too." Another man, a local mechanic named Joe, cleared his throat. "I've lived here my whole life, and I never thought much about how things like this affect people until I saw what happened to you and your family. My daughter's been asking questions about why people act the way they do, and I realized I didn't have good answers for her. That's why I'm here, to figure out how to do better." The conversation flowed, sometimes awkward, sometimes painfully honest, but always moving toward a deeper understanding. Rachel felt a surge of hope as she listened to the stories, recognizing that even the smallest changes could ripple outward, creating a community that was willing to see beyond the surface. Back at home, life for the Harpers began to find a new equilibrium. Rachel and Liam continued to work on their relationship, finding moments of connection that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. They spent time together in the kitchen, baking cookies for the community center's youth program. Liam focused intently as Rachel showed him how to measure flour, and Rachel found herself laughing for the first time in weeks when he accidentally spilled a bag of sugar on the floor. On another occasion, Rachel invited Liam to join her on a walk around the lake, this time without any of the tension that had defined their earlier trips. They walked in silence for a while, the cool breeze ruffling their hair, until Liam spoke up, his voice barely audible over the sound of the water lapping at the shore. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" Rachel paused, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know, Liam, but I do know that if she does, you'll be strong enough to handle it, and I'll be right here to help you, no matter what." Liam nodded, looking out at the water with a thoughtful expression. For the first time, he felt a sense of peace, a small but steady acceptance that his life didn't have to be defined by the absence of his mother. He could build something new, something different, with the people who were here. Noah, too, seemed to blossom in the newfound stability of their home. He often clambered into Rachel's lap with a book, snuggling into her side as she read to him. His easy affection helped bridge the remaining gaps between Rachel and Liam, and even Daniel found himself marveling at how far they had come. The shadows of the past hadn't vanished, but they no longer loomed so large. One evening, Daniel suggested that they host a small gathering for their neighbors, a backyard barbecue to celebrate the end of summer. At first, Rachel hesitated, worried that it might dredge up too many difficult memories. But as she looked around at her family, she realized that they were ready for a new beginning, a chance to show the town and themselves that they could move forward. The barbecue was a quiet success. Neighbors who had once kept their distance showed up with dishes to share, filling the backyard with the smell of grilled burgers and freshly baked pies. Emma arrived early, helping Rachel set up tables and hang strings of twinkling lights along the fence. She greeted Liam with a warm smile, offering him a plate of cookies she'd baked herself. Throughout the evening, Rachel found herself laughing and chatting with people she had once been wary of. She caught glimpses of Daniel and Liam talking on the grill, their heads bent close together in serious conversation. She even saw Noah chasing Buddy through the yard with a group of kids from the neighborhood, his high-pitched giggles ringing out over the music playing softly in the background. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Rachel felt a swell of gratitude that brought tears to her eyes. It wasn't perfect. There were still struggles, still moments when old wounds resurfaced, but it was enough. More than she had ever dared to hope for when she first arrived in Willow Creek. With each passing week, the changes in Willow Creek became more visible. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves began to open their doors to one another, hosting potlucks, book clubs, and backyard gatherings. The sense of division that had once hung over the town like a shadow was slowly being replaced with a sense of possibility. For Rachel, this shift was most evident in the interactions with Liam. Their relationship, once defined by tension and resentment, had begun to blossom into something that felt genuine. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when Liam withdrew into his room, the weight of his past hurt too heavy to share. But those moments were becoming rarer. And when he did come back to Rachel, he came back with more trust than before. One sunny afternoon, Rachel suggested they take Buddy for a walk around the neighborhood. Liam hesitated for a moment, then nodded, slipping on his sneakers and clipping the leash onto Buddy's collar. As they strolled down the tree-lined streets, Liam kept glancing at Rachel, as if searching for the right words. Finally he spoke, his voice barely louder than the breeze rustling through the leaves. "Do you ever wish you hadn't come here, Rachel? That you didn't have to deal with all this?" Rachel looked at him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his question. "There were times when I was scared, Liam. Times when I wondered if I was doing more harm than good. But I never wished I hadn't come here. Because coming here meant meeting you and Noah and your dad. It meant getting a chance to be part of your lives." Liam frowned, kicking at a loose pebble on the sidewalk. "Even after everything I did?" Rachel reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Especially after everything. Because I've seen how strong you are, how much you're willing to learn and change. That means more to me than you know." Liam's expression softened and he nodded, letting the words settle in. They continued their walk in silence, but it was a silence that felt warm, filled with the unspoken promise of a better future. Back at home, Daniel watched from the porch as they returned, his chest swelling with pride. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen Liam smile like that, or the last time Rachel had looked so at peace. It felt like the family he had always dreamed of, a family that had fought for each other through the worst of times and came out stronger on the other side. That evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Daniel proposed a toast. "To the future," he said, raising his glass of lemonade, "to new beginnings, and to the people we choose to become." Rachel, Liam, and Noah clinked their glasses with his, their faces lit by the warm glow of the overhead light. For the first time in a long while, the air around the table felt light, filled with laughter and stories about the day. And in that moment, they all felt it, a quiet certainty that they had found their way home. As the last of the barbecue guests trickled out of the backyard, Daniel found Rachel standing at the edge of the porch, watching the glow of fireflies flickering over the lawn. He slipped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You did great tonight," he murmured. "I'm proud of you." Rachel leaned back into his embrace, letting out a soft sigh. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Daniel. Without all of us trying to make it work." Daniel kissed the side of her head, his voice filled with emotion. I think you've done more for this town than you realize, Rachel. You've shown them that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who stand by you when things get hard. Rachel turned, cupping his face in her hands. I believe that too. I just hope I'm doing right by the boys. You are, Daniel assured her, his voice steady. And they know it, even if they don't always say it. As they stood together, watching the last of the twilight fade into night, Liam wandered out onto the porch, pausing when he saw them. He shuffled his feet awkwardly, but then he spoke up, his voice tentative. Rachel, can we go to the lake tomorrow? Just the two of us? Rachel's heart skipped a beat, and she smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I'd like that, Liam. I'd like that a lot. The next morning, Rachel and Liam made their way to the lake, retracing the steps that had once led to so much pain. But now the air felt different, lighter, filled with the promise of something new. They walked along the shore, the water glinting under the morning sun, and Liam reached out to take Rachel's hand, a small but significant gesture that spoke more than words ever could. They sat together on a fallen log, watching the ripples spread across the lake's surface. Liam leaned his head against Rachel's shoulder, and for the first time, he whispered the word that had once felt so foreign on his tongue. Mom! Rachel's breath caught in her chest, and she wrapped her arm around him, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. I'm here, Liam. I'm always here. As they sat there, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the lake, Rachel knew that their journey wasn't over. There would still be hard days, moments when doubt and fear resurfaced. But she also knew that they had built something strong, something that could withstand the storms. They had become a family not through blood, but through the bonds they had chosen to build. The following weeks brought small but meaningful milestones for the Harper family. Liam asked Rachel to help him with a school project on local history, surprising her with his newfound enthusiasm for learning. Noah made a new friend at the community center and proudly introduced him to Rachel and Daniel, excited to show off his cool new family. And Daniel, in his role as a council member, began working on new initiatives for inclusive community programs, inspired by the changes he'd seen in his own home. But perhaps the most profound moment came on a quiet Sunday morning when Rachel found a letter on her pillow, written in Liam's messy handwriting. She unfolded it carefully, her hands trembling as she read. Dear Rachel, I don't know how to say this out loud yet, so I thought maybe writing it down would be easier. I know I made things hard for you. I know I said things that hurt you, and I can't take them back, but I want you to know that I'm really sorry. I'm sorry for not giving you a chance sooner. I thought if I kept being angry, I could make the past go away, but it didn't work. You've been there for me even when I didn't deserve it, and that means a lot. I know now that you're not trying to replace my mom. You're just trying to be here for us, and I'm glad you are. I hope one day I can be as good to you as you've been to me. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for being my mom, even when I didn't want you to be. Love, Liam. Rachel pressed a hand to her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks as she read the letter again, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. She tucked the letter into the pocket of her sweater and went downstairs, where she found Liam sitting at the kitchen table, eating a bowl of cereal. She crossed the room in a few strides, pulling him into a fierce hug. For a moment he stiffened, caught off guard, but then he relaxed, resting his head against her shoulder. Thank you, Liam, she whispered. Thank you for letting me be a part of your life. Liam didn't say anything, but he hugged her back tightly, holding on as if afraid she might slip away. And in that embrace, Rachel knew that they had finally reached a place where they could truly begin to heal, together. As the screen fades from the final scene of the Harpers at the lake, the video transitions to a calm, sunset-lit view of the lake, the rippling water reflecting hues of pink and gold. Soft music plays in the background, creating a peaceful ambiance. A friendly voiceover begins. Thank you so much for joining us on this heartfelt journey with the Harpers. If you found yourself moved by their story of family, understanding, and hope, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the heart and inspire change. By subscribing, you'll be the first to hear about new stories, behind-the-scenes insights, and messages that remind us all of the power of love, resilience, and community. And remember, family isn't always about where we come from, But who stands by us when it matters most? If you agree, hit that subscribe button and let's continue this journey together. The screen shows a subtle animation of the subscribe button, along with an invitation to hit the notification bell with a gentle prompt reading. Subscribe for more inspiring stories.